So I'm doing the same technique as I did with the other garments. I'm just going to scrunch it up and do an ice dye. And I think I want the colors on this one to be more muted, more light and pastel, so we'll see if we can achieve that. I'm going to use some colors that I think are going to come out nice and light, but again, because I'm not familiar with these dyes, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Again, I'm using these elastic bands because I want to keep these scrunched up folds in place. So the elastic bands are going to help keep it in all crumpled up like this instead of coming apart. At least that's the idea. There, I think that's pretty good. These elastic bands aren't very big, so they're not really, I can't stretch them enough to go on this the way I wanted them to. But I'm just using what I've got. But I think this will be okay. So I ended up retying or crinkling this shirt because I wasn't happy how it looked. So I think this is going to work a lot better. And because I'm using those strainers for the other two garments, I don't have anything else. So I'm doing this kind of a setup here to see if this will work. I've seen some other dyers use a similar setup, so I did buy this just in case I needed it, so we're going to try it out for the first time. Okay, so what I've done here is I've used cake molds to form a little wall around the shirt because I have to put the ice in here, and because there's the ice is just going to fall off this if I don't do some kind of barrier with this type of setup. This seems kind of flimsy, so I hope that it works. I've seen others do a similar setup. I don't really trust this to not all collapse and fall apart, but I'm gonna try it. I won't know until I try. So I didn't really explain this setup that I have going here. So underneath this black thing here, it's a mat, a rubber mat for boots. It has a really nice high lip on it, so I think it'll work really good to catch the dye water that drains out of this. And then I have this shelving, wire shelving that I have on top of it just to elevate this so that it's not sitting down in that dye water. So I think that'll work. So as long as these are cake molds, as long as these will hold, it should contain the ice in here so that the ice doesn't just fall off this. So here's hoping. So I'm not just dumping the ice in here because, again, I don't really trust this cake mold to not fall apart. So I'm being careful when I'm placing the ice. All right, I think that looks pretty good. I think I'm fussing too much with it. But I think that'll hold, and now I'm just going to apply the dye. So pretty much all of the ice is melted, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to flip this and see how the dye, if the dye has saturated and gone through, and I have a feeling I'm gonna have to sprinkle the other side with some dye as well. So I'm taking this apart because I was able to get another one of these mesh baskets, so I think that'll be a lot easier to work with. But at least now I know that this I can get this to work when I need it, and I'm sure I will need this contraption in the future. And these are great because they can just be rinsed off with water and reused, so they're pretty handy, even though they're awkward. All right, so let's see what this looks like on the other side. Yeah, so definitely need to do the other side, so that's okay. I think what I'll do is, now that I have it in this, I'll take the elastics off. These elastics, by the way, as long as they're not broken, I can reuse. I just need to wash these off and I can reuse them as well. So I think I'm just going to kind of re-scrunch it in here. Spread it out a bit so that more dye can get into some areas. There's some really thick areas in here, so I'm just trying to even out the fabric so that I get more of an even distribution of the dye. So I think that's good. I'm just going to get the ice. I got some linen shirts in the mail, so I'm gonna have a little bit of fun with this shirt, see what happens. I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna do with it yet. Let's just see what happens. Oh, I wanted to mention that I have some wiffle balls under here. So those are just some practice balls that people use to practice, you know, baseball or golf or whatever. So I'm using the baseball sized balls under here, and I'm hoping that it will give some really interesting texture. This is another linen shirt, and I'm going to apply the color in stripes, both under and over the ice, just to see what happens. The collar of the shirt is here, so I'm going to be working from the top down. The dyeing process is very simple. In fact, it goes very fast. What really takes the time is washing the fabric out. With fiber reactive dyes, it's a lot different from acid dyes because the acid dyes will totally absorb into the fibers. There's very little, if anything, that comes out in the wash. So the washing with protein fibers and acid dyes, the water will run clear and it just takes a few minutes to wash. But that's not the case with fiber reactive dyes. You can see all of the dye that has been coming out as I rinse the fabric. What you do is you start with cold water because what you want to do is get all of that soda ash, any salts, you need to get that out of the fabric so that you stop or neutralize the dyeing process. So cold water is essential, so you need to run it. You need to run the cold water on the fabric until it pretty much runs clear, and that takes some time. And then after that, you use a hot cycle. Use water as hot as you can get it, and then more dye will start coming out of the fabric. But even though it looks like a lot is coming out, the dye that has adhered to the fabric, it really has adhered. You can see how vibrant that color is. So it's not, the dye isn't bleeding, it's just all the excess dye that's coming out of the fabric. And that is how fiber reactive dyes work on plant-based fibers. You will see a lot of dye come out of it. And that's something that if you're not used to it, it can be quite scary. But that's just the nature of how these dyes work. So it's very labor intensive as far as washing. Now I'm washing these by hand, and since doing these, I have learned that I can put these directly into the washing machine. So that has saved me a lot of time. I don't do any of this preliminary washing, whatever. As soon as the dye process is done, I put them directly into the washing machine. I do a cold cycle, a couple of cold cycles,
And then I do a couple of hot cycles, and that does all the work for me. Now when I dye yarn with these dyes, of course, I can't put that in the washing machine. So this is the process here that you're seeing that I will have to do with yarn. And very labor intensive, but the results are beautiful. And as long as you get it in your mind that this is just how it is, then you just go with it. And it's not as intimidating or as scary as it might look. So the rinsing process took forever. I think that's established. But finally, when the water was mostly clear, I was finally able to add the soap. I'm just using Dawn soap. It's what I have on hand. It's what I use to wash yarn, and it did a fine job with these shirts. If I was doing this in the washing machine, I would of course use a laundry detergent. So are you ready to see the final results of these shirts? I love how they turned out. They came out bold and vibrant, and they have been so much fun to wear. So you're going to see the before shots of the shirts and also a little recap of the dyeing process for each of the colors that I did. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you love them as much as I did.